Hey everybody, this is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and this is pros and cons for the AT&T Maestro Plus. Today, I'm going to be going over the best and the worst things about the phone. Let's get started. So my first pro for this phone is the display size. So this phone has a 6.2-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 271, and an aspect ratio of 19:9. Now this display isn't huge by any means, but at the same time, it is a really good size. It's big enough to where content consumption, like watching videos and reading and looking at things on the web, is going to be really comfortable. But at the same time, it's not so big that it's going to be uncomfortable in your pocket. So really, this is among the better sizes for a phone. Now, if you like an absolutely enormous screen, then I would suggest checking out something like the AT&T Radiant Max, where the screen is absolutely huge. But if you're looking for a phone with a really reasonably sized screen that has a perfect balance between big enough and really comfortable, then the AT&T Maestro Plus definitely has a strength there. Now my first con for this phone is the camera. This phone has a 5 megapixel front facing camera, and then on the back we have a dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel rear camera and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. This phone does have portrait mode, I'll give it that, but other than that, the quality of the camera and the features really leave a lot to be desired. The quality is not very good. You can see here, the picture just isn't that great. The image isn't very sharp. The colors are okay, but really not that good. Overall, it's not very impressive. It really does look like an inexpensive mobile phone type photo, whereas with a higher level phone or even a phone that's in the same range as this, like the AT&T Radiant Max, for example, the photos on that phone are quite a bit better. Almost every recent phone that I've seen has a better camera than this. Even the Samsung Galaxy A02, for example, that phone has a much better camera despite being in the same price range and actually having much less processing power than this phone. It still does have a better camera. So overall, the camera is really this phone's weak spot. It's not very good. So if you're getting this device expecting to take good quality pictures or even decent quality pictures, then you might end up being disappointed. Now my next pro for this phone is that it has a headphone jack. The headphone jack is located right here at the top next to the noise canceling microphone. And the reason that I consider this a pro at all is because manufacturers are doing away with headphone jacks more and more often these days. They've even started getting into the lower end phones. Now those are starting to lose their headphone jacks. So it's nice to have a headphone jack on this phone. I do understand that Bluetooth headphones and speakers are getting more and more common and widely used, but at the same time, it's really nice to be able to use normal headphones every now and then. Now my next pro for this phone, probably the most impressive pro on this list, is the processor. This phone is getting 3 gigabytes of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 460 processor. We ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 257 and a multi-core score of 1287. Now for a phone that you can get at Walmart for under $100, this is absolutely amazing. To put this into a little bit of perspective, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, which was one of the fastest flagship phones on the market at the time it was released, has a multi-core score on Geekbench 5 somewhere in the 1500s. And this is 1287, so this phone actually is not that far behind a flagship phone that was released only a few years ago. So it really goes to show how much this phone can actually accomplish. So if you're looking for a super inexpensive phone that's also really capable when it comes to processing power and things that you would typically need a more mid-range to higher end phone to do, then this phone is a great option for that. Now my next con for this phone is that it has a 720p display. With how nice of a design this phone has, I think it would be nice if it did have a better quality display as well, especially since this phone can shoot videos in qualities up to 1080p. It would be nice if it also had a 1080p display. 1080p is really not that special, which is why I think more of the lower end phones should start to have 1080p displays. Now, it doesn't really look bad at all, but I do think with the processing power this phone has, it really makes it above the average low-end and entry-level phone. So I really think it would have been a nice addition to have 1080p on the display of this phone. but unfortunately that's just not the case. Now my next pro for this phone is the materials and the design. For such a cheap phone, this phone is actually designed really well and it feels really nice too. So first of all, despite the slightly thick bezels on the top and the bottom and the water drop notch on the front facing camera, this phone actually does look pretty sleek and modern for what it is. And as you can see from the side, it is really not too thick either. So it's pretty manageable, it's really nice looking, and when you hold the phone, it really doesn't feel cheap. It is made of plastic, but it doesn't feel like a cheap plastic. I've seen a lot higher end phones than this that don't feel as good. They feel a lot cheaper than this phone. Being that you can get this phone for less than $100 at Walmart, it really makes it impressive to have such a decent design. It doesn't feel like a phone that you would get under $100. So that's a really great thing about it. Now my next con for this phone is the battery. This phone has a really small battery. At 3,300 milliamp hours, you're not gonna get a great amount of life out of this battery compared to a lot of phones with better batteries. With a 3,300 milliamp hour battery, this phone's not only gonna get a shorter life per charge than a phone with a bigger battery, but it's also not gonna last as long as time goes on. A good comparison to this phone would be something like the Blue G91 that has a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. Great battery, lasts a super long time, really impressive actually. And this phone's battery is almost as small as an iPhone battery with a 2815 milliamp hour battery. Now iPhones are somewhat known for having small batteries that don't last very long and die really quickly. And this phone is really not that far ahead, so that is a disappointment given the processing power, design, and other features that this phone has. My next pro for the phone is that it has a fingerprint scanner. Because there are a lot of phones, for example, the AT&T Fusion Z, the LG Phoenix 5, the Samsung Galaxy A01, A02, A02s, all of those phones don't have a fingerprint scanner despite being in a very similar price range to this phone. But this one does have the fingerprint scanner right here, and it works really well, as you can see. So it's really nice that this phone has one. I find it really inconvenient and super annoying to have to type in a PIN or a password to unlock my phone. I prefer to use either a fingerprint scanner or face unlock. I do like when it has both, but unfortunately that's not always the case. But at least this phone not only has a fingerprint scanner, but it has one that actually works really well. And that brings me to my next con for this phone, which is that it has no face unlock. That is pretty unfortunate because there are some times where you might want to use something that's more hands-free, or if you're just in a situation where the fingerprint scanner just isn't as convenient, whatever that may be. It's nice to have both because having both options makes it really easy to unlock your phone, and it just goes to ensure that you won't have to deal with typing in a PIN, which I think is just ridiculous to actually have to do. So it is a bit of a disappointment that this phone doesn't have face unlock. Now my final pro for this phone is its storage. Now typically I would say 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion is more of a con, but this is a super entry level phone that you can get for under $100 at Walmart. And taking a look at the phones that are in a similar price range and level, this phone is actually doing pretty well. Phones like the LG Phoenix 5, the AT&T Fusion Z, and the Samsung Galaxy A01 are all in a really similar price range, but those phones only have 16 gigabytes of internal storage. And some of these phones, like the LG Phoenix 5, only have microSD card expansion up to 32 gigabytes, whereas this limit isn't actually on this phone. So you can put a 64 gigabyte microSD card in the phone to expand it even more, and then you can put photos and videos, all that kind of stuff on it, and then use the internal storage itself for apps. Now the system data and apps in general are getting larger and larger, so I do believe it's really important to have as much storage as you can, and a microSD card won't help with apps. So I do personally think 64 gigabytes is more of a minimum for me. But in this situation, compared to the competitors at this range in entry-level phones, this is actually doing pretty well. Now my final con for this phone is that in general, this device is relatively featureless. Now I was just looking at things I can include in the tips, tricks, and hidden features for this phone, and there was a lot of stuff that actually wasn't here on this phone that a lot of other phones do have. For example, 3-finger screenshot. It's a really cool feature where you can just put 3 fingers on the screen and swipe and it'll take a screenshot. That wasn't on this phone. Half the gestures menu that I'm used to seeing on phones that aren't really that much better than this phone. For example, the Samsung Galaxy A12, the Motorola Moto G Power, the Motorola Moto G Play, and a lot of others in a similar level have so many more features than this phone. There's no good multitasking feature. The list goes on. It's really a bare bones phone. Even though it does have a great processor, a lot of other things about the software really aren't that great. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. And there are a lot of things that I would want to see on it that it doesn't have. But this is pros and cons for the AT&T Maestro Plus. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and found it useful as well. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you want any more information about the phone itself, be sure to watch the full review of the device on the channel, and also check the link in the description if you want to get any info on pricing and availability, because that stuff is always changing. But I will see you guys in the next video.